welcome in. It is Big Ten Today. It is great to have you with us on this Monday. We are presented by Rally House, Dave Revson, Howard Griffith. Week 1, we learned a lot.
Yeah.
Week 2, you get some new information and starting to put it all into some sort of a logical form here, Howard.
We're
as we
trying.
figure out where we are here.
We're trying, but I think one of the interesting things is you should continue to watch these teams play and progress through the season. To me, USC continues to be that team that really stands out and doing an outstanding job, regardless of who the opponent is.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Trojans, certainly one of the biggest stories. The guy who brought us that game, Yogi Roth, was at the Coliseum. He joins us now. Yogi, the Trojans were looking good, albeit dimly lit, but they did light up the scoreboard. They were absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, look, Hollywood, no lack of drama in L.A. at the Coliseum in the home opener and the first start ever for Miller Moss. And they're just in command. I think when you look at the first 2 weeks of the season, it's hard to really tell, I think, right now, who is special, who is elite. But can you handle all the details? Can you play with the discipline? To me, they did exactly that. We've been calling it a foundational year from the jump of this offseason with Lincoln Riley. They have a very solid foundation. And now as you look at the rest of the league, look, we said we think they're in the top third, maybe in the bottom of that third right now, and they're in the conversation of the top of that third, in my opinion, the way they played in the first 2 games.
Yeah, absolutely. They've been one of the most impressive teams in the league through 2 weeks. Let's get to our big story. It is the new AP poll, hot off the presses yesterday. Just like last week, the Big Ten, 6 teams in the poll, just not the same 6. Iowa out after falling to Iowa State. They were replaced by Nebraska. Huskers 23rd. It's their first ranking in 5 years. Penn State, the only Big Ten team that actually held steady. They remained at number 8. Everyone else moved around at least a little bit. Ohio State went down a spot as Texas leapfrogged them. The loss to the Longhorns dropped Michigan 7 spots. Oregon down 2 places to 9 after another uneven performance. And then that USC team we were talking about up from number 13 to number 11. Yogi, I would say USC and Nebraska probably in a battle for the biggest story through the first 2 weeks. But I think when you look at the caliber of the opposition, the rivalry that was involved, and just kind of the catharsis that it felt like Nebraska felt after beating Colorado, my sense is that's the place that we should start on this Monday. The Huskers didn't just beat the Buffs. They really beat them up, particularly in that first half that was absolutely dominant. What did you take from Nebraska's performance and the way that they throttled Colorado?
Well, fired up that they won because we're going there this week. So you always want your team to come in with a little extra mojo. So that was fun in that regard. But on a serious note, I think even when you look at the AP poll you just referenced, so much of it is preseason hype, roster expectations. Nebraska has earned their way into this thing based on how they have played, right? Dominant in week 1, dominant in week 2. And it's easy to talk about the offense. I want to go on the defense and Tony White. The scheme that he operates in is one that not a lot of teams run around the country. It's a 3-3-5 scheme, so it's a little different. It really challenged, I think, Colorado in a bunch of ways. They were in the backfield multiple times, sacking Shedeur Sanders. We saw the pick 6, of course, from Tommy Hill early in the ball game. And overall, Colorado never had a shot in this game because I didn't think they could protect and never really found a rhythm, never got their playmakers rolling. Like, to me, this was a dominant win from Nebraska, and the expectation that they have now as a top 25 team are real. And as you watch the progression of this young offense and some of these new playmakers, that's going to be the storyline moving forward, because I think the defense, it sold me at least. This is a really solid outfit that's going to give everyone they face challenges based on scheme, personnel, and then the way they just fly around and play free defensively under Tony White.
I think one of the things you see when you watch this Nebraska team is they're going to be physical at the point of attack. You talk about them on the defensive line, you know what they're going to get there. To me, when you look at them from a defensive standpoint, you know the type of performance that you're going to get. It's always going to be difficult. Who's the 4th rusher? Who's the 5th rusher? You're getting so much pressure in your face. All it takes is a split second for a guard or a tackle or a tight end, for that matter, to be slow to react to the rush, and you're there. But when you watch this team, the way they're constructed right now gives this offense, who's going to score points, no question about it, gives them a chance to continue to build that confidence. And that's what we're seeing with this Nebraska team. They're getting it done, but it's happening at the line of scrimmage on both sides, but it's allowing this offense to continue to develop and evolve.
I think it puts a lot less pressure on the offense. A year ago, they were pretty darn good defensively as well. They took a massive jump. Obviously, the issue there was quarterback play. It was really poor a season ago. Turnovers were a huge issue and just couldn't throw the ball. And you look at Dylan Raiola didn't have to be great in this game. He just had to be good. He had to not make mistakes. And that, to me, is the biggest difference with where they are this year with where they were a year ago. They have 1 turnover, Yogi, through 2 games. Remember, they had 31 turnovers a season ago. Dylan Raiola's making the right choices with the ball. He's not pressing. They've got a good run game. They got lots of different weapons, but they can lean on that defense a little bit. You look at the second half, they weren't overwhelming offensively at all, frankly, in this game. But the beauty of it was they didn't need to be.
You kind of see the NFL from Matt Rule to me watching this offense, or Glenn Thomas. You just look at that entire offensive staff and their experience. And watching that game back earlier this morning, you're seeing them not try to take too many chances, right? Play complementary football, not conservative football. The challenge for me for this offense is going to be in situational football. Struggled, I think, only 3 of 12 on third down. That's going to be the deal once they get into conference play. How can Dylan Raiola, how can this offense operate in a tight red zone, right? We saw that in the Iowa game. That's when you're going to have to execute if you want to keep climbing within this league. And I can't wait to get there to watch practice Friday. Talk about situational football. That's the growth for a young quarterback. A lot of quarterbacks now come out of high school, especially Dylan. I mean, he's so gifted. You can spin it all over the yard. But in those tight windows, when you have to make those split-second decisions, that to me is going to be the separator for this team. And those are the things that I know Glenn Thomas and company are coaching, they're working on. That's going to be the challenge they have to show up on game day, because the defenses in this league, you guys know better than me, they're special. They're elite. So we'll see what happens this weekend. Then I think it's Illinois on the schedule. Like, I can't wait until they get into conference play in critical downs and distances with this young offense.
Yogi talks about quarterbacks, whether they're young or a veteran quarterback, there are 3 to 4 throws that their quarterback's going to have to make for that offense.
Yeah.
And he's not been forced into that situation, which is a good thing. But you know it's coming at some point. It's about that situational football once again, but being able to execute when it happens.
And it may not be this weekend against UNI either.
Right.
In fact, I think probably
not.
Nebraska fans are hopeful that it's not this weekend where those become pressure throws against Northern Iowa. But you talk about it, Yogi. The first conference game is against Illinois. That takes on an entirely different complexion after the way the Illini played this weekend. We'll talk about them in a moment. We were talking about USC off the top. Yogi, again, you were there. They left absolutely no doubt. Ground and pound from Lincoln Riley. 249 rushing yards against Utah State after accumulating just 69 in the season-opening win against LSU. In all, they outgained the Aggies 544 to 190. That 190 number, the fewest yards they've allowed in a game in a decade. Just a thorough beatdown. Again, Yogi, we talked about off the top. You were there, so we'll give you the floor. Where do you want to start here with the Trojans?
Well, I think always at SC and in LA, I reference Hollywood off the top, like that's a real thing. Like, the hype in this city is amazing. Everything gets overhyped, whether it's the heat, whether it's the traffic, whether it's the waves, like whether it's the avocado toast, like everything is overhyped in LA. For the first time since Lincoln Riley has been there, I don't think that's the case with this team. Right, year one, they hit lightning in a bottle with Caleb Williams. We know how that went. 1 play away, a game away from being in the playoff. Last year, they really struggled on the offensive front and defensive line. This year is a different deal. Like, my favorite thing from Saturday night at the Coliseum was this offensive line and the receivers and the tight ends blocking downfield. The offensive line at the point of attack just dominated the line of scrimmage. It felt like the backs, kind of like the Ohio State game, like the backs weren't even touched. Woody Marks wasn't even touched 5, 6, 7 yards down the field. But it was the tight end group, 3 different tight ends they're using in 2 and 3 tight end sets. It's the receivers who had uncharacteristic drops. I mean, 3 drops in this game. That doesn't happen. 2 of them would have been a walk for a touchdown. They're blocking down the field. Like, it just feels like the foundation is real. And then defensively, same deal when you look at that defensive line, how they continue to rotate bodies. Anthony Lucas, I think, being a star. Eric Gentry playing one of his most complete games since he's been at USC without inside linebacker Mason Cobb. And if they can do that, to me, as I'm comping the Michigan-Texas game, as you're watching Ohio State, as you're watching the premier teams, Penn State in this league, I'm saying, okay, SC's got the foundation to go play there. And for the first time since Lincoln Riley's been there, it doesn't feel like it's just hype and just a bunch of elite playmakers and a dynamic one at quarterback. Like, this one feels real, fellas.
You know, you've heard Lincoln Riley talk about just the difference between being able to call a game with a quarterback that's going to play inside of the system versus having a quarterback that's is just a great player that can go out and make plays at any particular point. I think when you start to set up your offense, when you start to set up your plays and how you want to attack a team, knowing that you've got a guy that can stay within the system gives so much confidence, not only I think to the offense, but also to the play caller, because you know exactly what's going to be coming, or you can start to anticipate. And I think that's really helped. And listen, they've gotten better on the offensive line. That's really helped them, being able to run the football, not being able to have to be forced to rely upon what the pass game looks like all the time is helpful. But it's also the maturity of this team. And again, I go back to the bowl game. You think about the way these younger players that had to step up played. That's 3 games they're into now, that they've really answered the questions that have been out there. It shows some maturity too. It's just not about getting up one week, but also and then playing down to your competition, which we've seen some teams do in this conference. Defensively, there were questions, right? After the performance last week, would they still be riding high? Will they still pay attention to detail? And they did just that. That's why I think this story, what we're watching with SC, has the potential to be really special, because they're answering all the questions that are out there for what this team needs to be able to do to not only compete for a Big Ten championship, but go deep into the 12-team playoff.
And the defense is the difference, as you're talking about there, because to Yogi's point, they've had high-powered offenses. They've had great quarterbacks. They had a Heisman-winning quarterback 2 years ago in Caleb Williams. The difference here is defense. Again, this is their first shutout since 2011. I know you can say, well, it's Utah State.
It doesn't matter. You're right.
Yeah, Utah State's high-powered offense. They play at an up-tempo rhythm, although we didn't see as much of that, I think, as we thought we might see on Saturday night. But they played teams at the caliber of Utah State, and frankly worse than Utah State since 2011, didn't shut them out and didn't dominate them in the way that they have. So give a ton of credit. Man, Denton Lynn's done an amazing job with that defense, just as he did a year ago at UCLA, and it feels like a different Trojans team. They have a bye week, then they take on Michigan. So we'll find out. We'll learn a lot more. But they certainly gave us a really good feel after that win over LSU, and did nothing to disabuse us of the notion that they are vastly improved with that win over Utah State. All right, as for the highest-ranked team in the Big Ten, OSU looked the part against Western Michigan. Bucks got off to a slow start in week 1. They did not in week 2. They thoroughly dominated a team that led Wisconsin in the fourth quarter at its opener. I mentioned the yardage differential for USC. How about for Ohio State? 683 to 99. 584-yard difference, tied for the largest in the Big Ten this century. A 56-0 beatdown. Yogi, that's what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah, that was dominant in every way. I mean, those backs, they weren't touched, I felt like, all game. I think it was Jake Butt who might have had the line during the broadcast of, like, they're just out here doing conditioning at times. And that's not disrespectful to their opponent. That was just the reality of the offensive front getting to the second and third layer of that defense. I loved what Ryan Day said after the game, where he compared it to the Navy SEAL training, where he said, look, quote, you sink to your level of training. And we were at practice in training camp. I didn't get to see everybody. It's only a snapshot, but it was one of the most electric and competitive practices I've seen in my career. Not surprised that they came out and played that way. And I love even what Will Howard said after the game of, like, week 1, like, there was so much newness for him, for Chip Kelly being an offensive coordinator up in the booth. It's been quite a long time since he was up in the booth. They had to find their rhythm. They did. Of course, they pulled away. They dominated this week. And now they have a bye. Another thing Ryan Day referenced was they're not going into traditional bye mode. They're going right back to practice mode. And I like that for this team, because there's still elements to work on. The schedule is set up for them, as well as anybody in America, in terms of their first few games of the season. But they go right back to work. And I just felt like we watched not just a workmanlike effort, but we saw the elite playmaker. We saw the command. And I think we saw Will Howard play with a lot of joy. Of course, how don't you when you roll like that? But first game, he referenced, you know, he was excited. He was a little nervous. There was a lot of newness. Now this team settles in. They look like the roster that we all saw in training camp and expected to have the type of season that they at least have had through 2 games.
When you have veterans throughout your roster at all these positions, this is what you get. These are some of the performances that you're going to get. When you go into a bye week, you expect to work. Those guys are asking for work. We want to get better. They know where the goal line is, and they haven't gotten close to it just yet. It's a process, but this is a veteran team that we're going to continue to watch get better. And as this offense, as Will Howard continues to get comfortable with this, as Chip Kelly continues to get comfortable as a play caller and understanding just what they ultimately want to do and how they want to attack people, it becomes what I think Ohio State has been chasing for a couple of years now, and that's the experience part. And you can chase it, but you need to have your players come back and be a part of it. And that's what we've seen. That's the biggest difference to me in what we've seen in this Ohio State roster.
Yeah, Howard, I want to ask you, you've seen this team so much, like, how do you stop them? Because they look like a video game. They remind me of SC back in 05 with Matt and Reggie and those types of players. And I'm just watching the tape being like, man, I feel for some teams that have to play these guys. Because they just have, and they legit have so many weapons. And if they're as veteran as you reference, which we think they are, I don't know, man. This is going to be a fun team to watch in the regular season. And I think we would assume if they can get to the playoff, they have the ability to do some damage.
And listen, there are opponents out there and rosters out there that are comparable to what Ohio State has, right? But I think for Ohio State, the person that they're also fighting is the one that's in the mirror when they wake up each and every day. And they've got to want to go out and be the very best that they can. And by all accounts, by all the quotes, by all the things we've heard from this team, the players, the coaching staff, they know where that is. They know where they need to get, and they're not there yet. So they're going to continue to push each other. As long as they have something that's out there, which they're going to have out there for a long time as the season progresses, I expect this team to continue to fly high.
And you know the motivation is there. You have so many guys who could have left, who could have gone to the NFL, who decided to come back to chase Michigan, who's beaten them 3 years in a row, to chase a Big Ten title, and ultimately to chase a national title that has eluded them. So the motivation is there, the talent is there. It's kind of a potent combination, and it's exciting to see where it's going to go here for the Buckeyes. Back on Big Ten today, Michigan's 31-12 loss to Texas was truthfully over by halftime. Horns led it by 3 touchdowns at the break. They had more than tripled the Wolverines' yardage total, ran more than twice as many plays. Mason Blue made it a bit more respectable in the final 30 minutes, but still saw their Big Ten record 29-game regular season win streak come to an end in overwhelming fashion. Yogi, it didn't look good on either side of the ball. I think it's fair to point out Texas is really good, but still this was not nearly as competitive a game, I think, as Wolverines fans obviously hoped that it would be. What stood out to you as you watched the way that Texas manhandled them, particularly early on in this game?
Well, you go back and you watch the game and you know, look at the first quarter, and I thought at least Michigan defensively was playing pretty good, right? I mean, they do a nice job. They're getting after the quarterback. Texas is making a couple plays down the field, but you end that first quarter and you're thinking, okay, it's just kind of how we expected it, back and forth. Texas is a high-powered offense with Quinn Ewers and company. You got to that second quarter and it was just all Texas, and it was a rout. I think the couple things that I took away from this. One is that when you're playing an elite quarterback, which Michigan's going to do in their next game in Miller Moss, a guy who can anticipate where pressures are coming from and know where to get the ball out, then it's going to be advantage offense to a degree. And that's going to be a dance that I think we're going to see play out in 2 weeks when these two teams face each other in the Big House. I think when you look at them offensively, still just really no rhythm. You know, that to me is hard to understand when I'm watching this one. I'm saying, okay, cool. I know the scheme. You know what Kirk Campbell wants to call. You're just not seeing a lot of execution, whether it's pressure in the backfield and the lap of the quarterback, wondering if they're going to end up playing a little bit more of Alex Orji's due to his athleticism. Those are some questions that I'm wondering. And I think for Michigan, it's great that they have a bye week. It's a bad thing for SC. If SC is playing Michigan right now, it's big advantage Trojans, even though they have to go to the Big House. The fact that they get a week to retool this thing, we might see a different version of this offense. We might see a different quarterback. I don't know what we're going to see offensively, but they have to find a way to create explosive plays. Like, two of the biggest stats in the history of football are turnovers and explosive plays. This offense has not found explosive plays in the pass game, and that is, to me, going to be an issue if they want to repeat as champs in the Big Ten, let alone make noise in the postseason.
Hey, Yogs, I know you mean no disrespect to the Red Wolves, but Michigan does have a game this week. They've got Arkansas State coming up, so they don't get that
Sorry
week.
about that.
No, it's all right. I just wanted to point out they don't get that week. They'd love to have that week that USC has. A Michigan game will be here on the Big Ten Network. I think, Howard, when I look at this game, to me, it was, and Yogi pointed it out, right? I mean, the game's over by halftime. The second quarter was thorough domination from Michigan. The issue is clearly on the offensive end, as we talked about. They're last in the Big Ten in total offense through 2 games. It's a little bit of an imprecise comparison, to be fair, because they probably played, well, certainly they played maybe the best team that anyone in the Big Ten has played in Texas. They also played a fairly competitive team in Fresno State in week 1. So 2-week stats, some of that can be a little deceptive. But I thought what really stood out to me was the defense wasn't great either. Again, you're playing an elite quarterback, you're playing an elite team, but they've hung their hat on defense here over the last few years, and that was a fine defensive effort, but it wasn't a good enough defensive effort to overcome what they've got offensively.
So if we look at it from a defensive standpoint, you go back a week ago, right, to their opener. There were some situations there where there were some one-on-one situations that were missed by their opponent that would have been exposed. So you get to Texas and you say, well, okay, well, the talent that they have at the wide receiver position, they're going to cause them some problems. And they're going to put this defense in conflict. And you think about the quarterback being able to do all the things that he can. I thought the other thing that happened is this was a difference in talent as well. You see the type of recruiting that has been done over the last 3 years at Texas. It was clear. Now, and that's not taking anything away from Michigan, because I think Michigan does a great job of recruiting for what they want to be in that system. But Texas was playing at a different level, at a lot of different positions, and particularly the offensive line. Coach Flood is over there now, and he really did a great job. I mean, you're talking about being able to pull the center, pull the guards, really did a good job with the offensive line and put their skill position defenders in conflict, and they really struggled a little bit in that area. Tackling was the problem as well.
Cal Flood, the former Rutgers coach, now on that Texas staff. It is interesting to think back a year ago, and you think about Texas going into Alabama and beating the Crimson Tide. There was all the hand-wringing at Alabama. Jalen Milroe got benched, and Alabama ended up in the 4-team playoff. So it's not to say it can't happen, but again, I do think there's a difference just based on what you're talking about, just in how much of a difference there appeared to be between these two teams. Michigan has much more ground to make up than Alabama appeared to have to make up last year.
And let's be clear, this is still a good Michigan football
Very good.
team.
And it's a 12-team playoff rather than a 40.
Absolutely. They ran up against a juggernaut.
Yeah.
And this Texas team is really good.
They are really good. Okay, so that's the story with Michigan. Did not look great. Penn State didn't look great for much of the game either, but figured out a way against Bowling Green. Remember, they had the fabulous performance against West Virginia. They trailed, though, by a touchdown at the half against the Falcons. Took over in the second. Nick Singleton was great. 2 TDs, including his third run of 40 yards or longer in just 2 games, exceeding his total from all of last year as Penn State pulls it out 34-27. And so, Yogi, I ask you, after what I think we all thought was one of the best wins in the Big Ten in week 1, that's certainly USC beating LSU was fabulous, but Penn State going to West Virginia was in the conversation, no doubt. Was this a natural letdown here, or is it a cause for greater concern?
Probably a combination. Okay. I think we're still dealing with athletes that are in college, and they did play a team that I think had over 30 seniors on the roster. So the way they built that thing at Bowling Green has been pretty impressive. So they got a really disciplined team. To me, I go back to what James Franklin said right after the game, where he said on defense, guys were trying to make plays instead of play the defense. So you go back and you just watch the defensive cut-ups of this game, and I think you see exactly that, whether it's out of a position a little bit. And in addition, Bowling Green getting the ball out. I think that's how I would play Penn State's defense. We know how athletic they are. We know how explosive they are. We know how physical they are. The ball was out of the quarterback's hand quickly, and they were moving the ball down the field, especially early on in this ball game. So to the point of trying to make plays, I think when you saw the ball in the air, the Penn State defenders, whether they're trying to make a big hit or make a big play on the ball, to me, playing within this scheme is going to have to be a huge jump for them as they continue on in the season.
When I watch Penn State, you start to see some of the things that can really make this team really good and really special as far as some of the explosive plays. And you look at Singleton, and I go back to his touchdown grab that I thought was outstanding, because normally what we see from their backs is catching balls out of the backfield, flare routes, and that sort of thing. He had a free release up the seam, and I thought he did a really good job. It was too deep, and the quarterback led him. Drew did a good job of leading him right to the middle of the field, and he also did a good job of staying inside and not getting outside. So when you see plays like that, that just shows you the athleticism of Singleton, but also shows you just how you can create some matchups when you have your running backs going against linebackers.
So, look, you win the game. I think, again, it's a MAC team, but we saw what happened with Notre Dame. There's plenty of evidence out there that it could have been dramatically worse for Penn State. I do think you scratch your head a little bit over the defense, and Yogi made a great point about the way that Bowling Green attacked them. Scott Loeffler, really good coach, former Michigan quarterback. Still the most points Penn State's ever given up in 40 games against a MAC team. They'll have their attention this week. They got a bye game, and then they have a game against Kent State before they open Big Ten play against Illinois. If they were feeling really good about themselves after the game against West Virginia, it'll be easy to see how James Franklin will get their attention this week. All right, let's touch a little bit on another narrow escape. For the second straight week, Oregon found itself in a dogfight. For the second straight week, the Ducks did escape, though. Atticus Seppington, the game-winning field goal on the final play to top Boise State. Ducks were outgained in the game. They needed 2 special teams TDs to eke out the win. Yogi, you were there for the Idaho game, and it felt like there were some common themes here, including those ongoing offensive line issues. We're 2 weeks in now. They've run for 107 and 109 yards. How concerned are you about the Oregon O-line and, by extension, about the Oregon run game?
Well, I think it's fair to be concerned because your point is well said, right? 5 penalties on the offensive front in both game 1 and game 2. They give a sack on the first drive of the game. They continue to do that. Remember, in the last 2 years combined, it was 10 total, 5 per year. They've eclipsed that already this season. So I think it's fair to be concerned about that. But I do believe this and you guys know Dan Lanning, you've gotten to know this program. They do have the roster. They do have the players, and I think they have the scheme. I think they have to settle in to find the right combination on the offensive front. And I think they will. And I think there's ways you can help yourself with that, whether that's changing to a different type of protection, right? Shrinking the offensive line's types of protections. And maybe that alters the playbook. Because the reality is Dylan Gabriel's not giving the ball up. Right, he's playing extremely heady football, and I think in these first 2 games, I think you referenced Penn State. Is it a good thing? Yeah, it's probably a good thing for that program. I think same deal here for Oregon. Their challenge is they're going to play their bitter rival this weekend on the road, and they're going to get every single thing from Trent Bray is the head coach. He was the defensive coordinator. He's going to have a great scheme. He's going to try to attack the interior of this offensive front, and they're going to have answers. If it's me, I'm having conservative answers on the offensive front. Like, it's full-on gap protection. It's how do we make sure we protect our quarterback? They have tight ends. Do they add one of them to the protection unit? I know that'll adjust the offense a little bit, but they have to protect Dylan Gabriel because this is a team that still has all the tools to make a lot of noise, even though they haven't been perfect in the first 2 weeks of the season.
You mentioned the playbook and being able to shrink that for the offensive line or for the offense in general, because they have to be able to get some production out of the run game. That just has to happen. Yeah, you know you have the weapons that can get outside. The quarterback's going to take care of the ball, but you have to be able to run the ball with some consistency. Do you have an opportunity to build too? Yeah, because you can look and say, well, we're up against it each and every week. We found ourselves in fights for the first 2 weeks. When can we get to a point when we can just go out and run our scheme and do all the things that we have to? You have to clean up the little things. And right now, the little things are what's standing in their way, and they have to get those things taken care of. Because as you mentioned, with the type of roster that they have, the type of coaching staff that they have, they should be a little bit further along than they are right now.
And let's give some credit where credit's due. Boise State's pretty good. Ashton Jeanty may win the Doak Walker Award. He is absolutely fabulous. But I think to your guys' point, that explains some of the defensive challenges. But the offensive stuff is a little bit of a head-scratcher, particularly given how Boise played in its opener defensively against Georgia Southern. Yogi, give us a little more sense of what Oregon is walking into at Reser Stadium against Oregon State this week. For people who don't understand this rivalry and don't understand the bitterness that probably existed already and that has been amplified and intensified here in the last year.
Yeah, well, I've called this game before, and every snap, it feels like Ohio State, Michigan, and you guys have been to that. Any rivalry anyone has ever been to who's watching, imagine that. Now, based on what has gone on in the last year, crank it up by about 10. I mean, that's just going to be the reality of this thing. And Oregon State, they play a style of football that's similar to Boise State. I mean, they're going to run the football. They're going to try to be a physical outfit. They like their backfield. They like trying to control the line of scrimmage. And defensively, it's going to be man-to-man in your face, and they're going to bring aggressive pressures a lot. And the atmosphere will be raucous. I mean, I called USC's last game in Reser Stadium. And no joke, fellas, it was the loudest stadium I've ever called a game in, and it was only half full because the stadium was under construction. So however they made that happen, they made it happen in a powerful way. It's going to be that again. And that's why I think for the Oregon Ducks, the first 2 weeks were a great thing for them because they found out that they have resolve. Right? Remember the 4 DNA traits I said I'd say every week? Connection, growth, toughness, and sacrifice. To me, it's the toughness part of this team. When you are the king of the mountain and you are anointed like Oregon was, entering the Big Ten, preseason favorite to potentially win the whole thing, etc., it's easy to feel yourself a little bit. And when things get hard, to go negative. You watch this team on the sideline, you watch their body language, it was never that. So I like that they found some resolve in the first 2 weeks because they are going to need it in a standing room only, probably the biggest crowd in the history of Oregon State football this upcoming weekend.
We will preview that one throughout the week. Of course, Washington has Washington State as well this week, so a couple heated rivalry games for two of the new Big Ten members. Up next, Illinois appears to have put last year's disappointment, I should say, in the rearview mirror. A huge home win for the Fighting Illini. We will talk it over next. Illinois outscored Kansas 10-0 in the fourth quarter, topped the 19th-ranked Jayhawks 23-17. It was just their third win in their last 35 games against ranked teams, first in 4 years. It happened in front of their first sellout crowd since 2016. Just a great night all around in Champaign, and especially sweet when you consider how Kansas shredded them last year. And last year, the issue really with the Illini was the degree to which the defense dropped back after Ryan Walters left for Purdue. This looked a lot more like the 2022 Illinois defense that was, in a lot of measures, the best one in the country, Yogi. Really a positive win for Illinois in so many ways. What did you take from what we saw from the Illini?
Well, I love what I heard and from the head coach. He's always given us cool phrases, right? It was CAOTTY, catch all the ones they throw you. Also speaking to the secondary as they picked off 3 passes. That was amazing to watch this defense, and I thought they played with an edge, really, and I thought that the defense was a catapult offensively. You watched Luke Altmaier play with an edge. You see those guys going up and making plays in the back end. It just sparked this home crowd. And then I think when you watched Altmaier when he had to, I loved how he took shots. So truly a complimentary game in a bunch of ways. Look at the range back there from the guys in the back end. Time and time again, they rose and met the moment. And I think you have to play with an edge in this league. And it's something that doesn't happen overnight. You guys know this better than I, but the edge has been built there. I think when you watch this team 2 years ago, last year you referenced the slide they had defensively. This year, it seems like they got a little bit of swagger back on that side of the ball. And I think it only helped out Altmaier and company on the offensive side.
Yeah, when you could take the football away, I mean, it really changes everything. Yes. The numbers bear that out. And when you make some of the defensive plays that they made, being able to give their offense the ball, being able to turn those into points, that just becomes confidence for them. And because this is a defense that they really struggled at all levels last year, and part of that was due to injury, part of that was the newness of the system. But they've gotten to a point now where they're feeling pretty good about themselves. Now we move the hurdle a little bit further and say, okay, can you be mature now? You handled that game against a game that you really were dominated in a year ago. You came back and exacted your revenge. What are you going to do this week? So you're always moving that bar because you always want to see that growth of the team, understanding what's at stake.
And you mentioned taking the ball away, and when we talk about what went wrong for Illinois last year, they had a huge drop-off in turnover margin. They went from 3rd to 122nd in the country. They have 8 takeaways now through 2 games. So we're seeing, again, shades of that 2022 defense that forced opponents to make mistakes. They're not making as many themselves as they made a year ago, and that's how you win football games. I'll tell you, first 2 conference games for Illinois are going to be fascinating. At Nebraska, at Penn State, we're going to learn a ton about the Fighting Illini. The other Big Ten, Big 12 battle did not go as well. Iowa saw a 13-0 halftime lead slip away at home against rival Iowa State. Cyclones won it on this 54-yard field goal in the waning seconds. Iowa's pass game, which looked so good in the opener against Illinois State, mustered just 99 yards in this one. I think there's going to be a lot of focus, Yogi, on quarterback play, and I get it for exactly the reasons that we talked about. I do think it's fair to point out Iowa's defense, which was so good in the first half and is good year in and year out, as we know, kind of got shredded in the second half. Iowa State went for 260 yards in the second half. So not only did the offense not come to play in the second half, neither did the defense. And unfortunately, that's the way you lose games.
Yeah, and they had every opportunity to win this one. Defensively, gave up 4 plays of over 20 yards. Not going to make it okay, I'm sure, for that coaching staff as they went back and looked at that tape. I go to the offense, though, because early on you watch this game and you see them trying to be creative. You see them trying to take shots down the field. They connect on a little dig to the left of Cade McNamara, and you're thinking, okay, this offense is finding a little flow here. And then the rest of the game, especially in the tight red zone, they had nothing doing, man. And if they just convert any of those field goals into touchdowns, they win this ball game. They're feeling good about themselves today. And that's going to be an issue to me moving forward. I mean, again, a lot of guys can play catch, but inside the 15, the 10, the 5, you got to go play quarterback, and you got to try to find ways to get guys open. They struggled there, tried a variety of different things, but something went wrong almost every time, whether it was pressure due to the offensive line, whether it was a running back missing a blitz and some pass protection, a miss on a throw. There were just so many elements there that is going to be a thing as you watch Iowa move forward this season. I just think this league is too good, where you're going to have to find touchdowns in the red zone instead of field goals, especially an offense that we know is not going to be up-tempo, is not trying to score 40 a game. I mean, they need to be more efficient watching this one back, because in every realm, I'm thinking this is how Iowa wins football. They're going to win this one. Too many explosives allowed and not nearly enough created offensively.
And I think sometimes from a defensive standpoint, when they've played as well as played over the years, not just seasons, over the years, you're going to have some letdowns. You're going to have some times when the offense really is able to step up and make a lot of plays against you. But I think you have to be able to still be able to make those throws when needed. You can't turn the football over. And if you're going to miss, they can't be turnovers. They've got a lot out of the run game, but the run game has to continue to get better. Johnson was really good there, and I think they have to continue to build on that. But they have to be able to convert on third downs, be able to stay on the field and move the football.
You bring up the positive Caleb Johnson. Remember, he didn't play in the first half in the opening game against Illinois State due to a suspension, went over 100 yards in the second half. He was over 100 yards in the first half of this game and had a huge game here. So it does feel like they've solved the run game. I think we maybe overreacted a little bit to the pass game against Illinois State, and it's going to be interesting to see how does Cade McNamara handle this here going forward here, Yogi, because I think we all feel like the defense will come back, and let's give credit to Iowa State. Rocco Beck, really good quarterback. There's a lot of high hopes with this Cyclones team this year, so sometimes you go up against some pretty good talent, which they did, but they're going to have to be able to throw the ball better than they did here in week 2.
Yeah, and so many quarterbacks say the same quote, which is, I love to find my rhythm early. He's got to continue to find that and sustain that throughout the game. I thought they found a rhythm early on in the ball game, but you go to the fourth quarter, and I think it's about 6:39 left, and again about 2:30 left. The offense gets the ball back, and if you're Iowa, this is where you need to just end the game, right? Run your 4-minute offense, eat up the clock, convert 2 or 3 third downs, and that's where this offense needs to go. And for Cade McNamara, he's got to continue to find that type of rhythm. And I'd be curious to watch like the start of drives with this team moving forward. Do they try to find him early completions? Because the end of the game, that's all you ask as an offense, especially an Iowa offense, right? We want to control the line of scrimmage, give us the ball back, let us just end this thing. 2 opportunities, in my opinion, to do it came up void on both of them.
It's pretty interesting juxtaposing Illinois and Iowa, because Iowa did not convert, as you said, in that 4-minute offense. Illinois ran about as good a 4-minute offense as you can possibly run to salt the game away against Kansas. Got a conference game in the books. Michigan State is alone in first place in the Big Ten. We'll show you how they pulled off a road win against the Terps. Next. The first conference game of the season going to Michigan State. Spartans scoring 10 points in the final 4.5 minutes to top Maryland in College Park. Jonathan Kim, the game-winning field goal as time expired. The team picked 16th in the unofficial preseason media poll, wins the first conference game of the season. And Yogi, they did so looking dramatically better offensively than in week one. Still some mistakes from Aiden Childs, threw 3 picks. But, man, you can see the upside for him, and you can see the upside for this whole Michigan State offense.
Well, I love what he said post-game, where he said, week one, I played a little scared. And I think it's fair to accept that, right? It's the first time playing as a starter in major college football, right? This guy came with dramatic fanfare. And as you watched him, whether it was in week one or this past weekend in a conference game, every time it got hard or he made a mistake, he bounced back. I call it PACE, plays after critical errors. And if you chart that for Aiden Childs, after a pick, after a poor decision, he wasn't afraid to come back and launch it 30, 40, 50 yards down the field. And that is the thing in terms of quarterbacks where they're truly growing and evolving before our eyes. I mean, I just think that is going to be him. They'll get another win this weekend, and now they're halfway to a bowl game. And I think if you ask this fan base, can we get to a bowl this year? Is that a pretty successful season? They would say, heck yeah. And now, heading into week 3, they're thinking they can make a little bit more noise than just getting to the postseason.
Yeah, I think that's what's exciting when you watch Childs. The upside is there. You know he's going to be able to do it. Just has to learn, continue to grow as a quarterback. But when you look at Maryland, you think about just how good they've been on the defensive side of the football and almost giving up 500 yards of total offense. The 9 penalties, that's an issue.
Well,
80
Terps
yards
versus Terps, yeah.
You just can't do that. And, defensively, 4 plays of 30 yards or more. They just have to get back to it. And really, when you talk about, I keep going back to the maturity of the teams, right? We keep expecting Maryland to take that next step, and they don't take the step because of whatever reason. Now, obviously, Michigan State had a lot to do with that, but I'm still encouraged about what the type of play they're getting out of Billy Edwards.
This is the challenge for them. It's conference play, right? They're 14-28 now under Mike Locksley in Big Ten play. I think this next game is really critical for them. Virginia's better than they were a year ago, at least by indications of these first 2 weeks. You're going to Virginia. They manhandled them a year ago. Maryland did against the Cavaliers. Can you beat them soundly again? Can you get back on track? Then you got Villanova, and I think you can kind of erase what is probably a little bit of a bad taste
it is.
in your mouth.
Not
here.
a little bit.
Yeah. So can you get back on track? This is a big one here because if you lose this, you're 1-2, and all of a sudden you're reeling a little bit. Dramatic conclusion of our show next. Which 2-0 start has opened our eyes the most? Plus, we'll take you around the Big Ten. Keep it here on Big Ten Today. It is time to go around the Big Ten. Penn State volleyball won the Kentucky Invitational on Saturday. They topped Ball State in the title match. They came on the heels of Friday's win over the host team, 9th-ranked Kentucky. Penn State 5-0 with 3 ranked wins. Washington still unbeaten as well. They topped Fresno State, Georgia, and Colorado. The latter 2 both in 5 sets to win the Buffs Classic in Boulder. Washington was down 2-0 in the championship match before battling back for the win. Great weekend for the nation's #1 ranked field hockey team. Northwestern topped #5 Duke and #17 BC in Evanston to improve to 4-0 on the year. They've got 2 games away from home this week. Then they open conference play in Evanston September 20th against Iowa here on the Big Ten Network. And Michigan State's 5th-ranked women's soccer team finished conference play undefeated. Justina Gaynor with a goal in the 84th minute to give the Spartans a 1-0 win over Loyola of Chicago. They're 5-0-2, just the 5th time they've made it through non-conference unscathed ever, the 2nd time under Jeff Hostler. Speaking of undefeated, there are 4 teams that we have not yet talked about in this show that can lay claim to that mantle: Washington, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Rutgers. So of those 4, Yogi, whose 2-0 stands out to you the most?
It's hard to choose because I'm excited to watch Indiana come to LA. I just want to know what Coach Cignetti is going to be like in Hollywood, right? It's just going to be fun. I hope he's mic'd up for that game at the Rose Bowl, the home opener for Deshaun Foster. But I got to go to UW right now just because of what they have this weekend, right? They're playing their Apple Cup, their rivalry game in the Seahawks Stadium in Seattle. It's going to be electric. And I'm kind of getting used to these rivalry games early on. So I'll probably lean towards there. But I'm excited for all of these teams and what they've accomplished through first 2 games.
Yeah, they've done an outstanding job, all of them that have gotten to this point. But for me, it is Indiana because I now want to see what this team is ultimately going to look like when they go on the road. This will be their first road trip. Won't be an easy one. They'll have a challenge out there, but I'll get an idea to see where this Indiana team is headed. They've done outstanding to this point, taking care of their business. Let's see if they can go on the road and do it.
77 points against Western Illinois. Look, I realize Western Illinois has not won a game since 2021. I mean,
77 points is a lot of
but
points.
77 points is a lot of points. And the other thing I'll say is FIU, who they beat in week 1, you're like, how good are they? They crushed Central Michigan. So that win maybe looks a little bit better than it did on the opening weekend. Again, we're going to learn a lot more, as you guys say, when they go to UCLA. And Yogi, how about Rutgers? Not just 2-0, but 40 or more points in their first 2 games for the first time in the history of the program. And as we know, we're talking about the oldest program in major college football, so that's saying something.
I love watching that thing go. And they actually do have the bye this week, so it'll be fun to watch them grow from 2-0 to see where they head up after this weekend.
Quick thought on the Badgers, 2-0?
We're going to find out a lot about them, right, this week.
It's a fairly significant game.
Yeah, they're at home, but we'll find out a lot about them. And I think this is a team where they'll have to be creative. They'll have to get something, and they'll have to play a clean game as well.
Alabama coming into Camp Randall for those who have not flipped out their schedule yet.
Yeah, okay. It's going to be a tough one.
Yeah,
it's an opportunity.
It will be tough. Well, yes. There are some who have been in Madison in the past who would label that an opportunity. They'll have to be a lot better, frankly, to give the Tide a good game. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time on Big Ten Today.